Peter McElveen joins us now. Peter, you wrote a piece the other day. You came and spent just a couple of days in Texas, and you were shocked. And you've been one of the best, now that Nigel's in the government, Raheem's over here covering more American news. I think you and Tommy Robinson are the two best about showing what's going on and really the collapse of our mother country, Great Britain. And it's shocking, and it gets worse every day, and it's accelerating at an accelerating rate. You came here for just a couple of days in Texas, and you told me, you said, hey, look, you guys got to understand, you're heading down the same path and maybe heading down the same path more rapidly than you guys were at the beginning. Walk us through that in this piece you wrote the other day.
Well, yeah, Raheem's done a great job. He's left Londonistan. I'm still here. And this was showing some of the courts that are operating, some of the Sharia courts that are operating in the US. To give you an example, and in the UK, we've got 85 Sharia courts. They've been operating since 1982. There was a government report back, I think, 2018, and it said that these bodies operate as a parallel legal system, and they subject tens of thousands of British women to medieval rules. That was the understanding of the British government in 2018. So over in the US, in Texas, I looked at 3 different Sharia courts that are operating. The Islamic Tribunal of Dallas, which is up there, northeast Dallas, up near Piano, where the huge epic city development is being pushed forward. And it now has, I think it started 2014 as a voluntary mediation service. And these all start as voluntary. But Steve, it is not voluntary for the women. The women have no choice. And in the UK, some of the courts, 90% of the cases are by women who are desperate and want to help in their marriages and are trapped. And all they need is the man to say, I divorce you 3 times, according to Islamic law. And she is divorced, she is thrown out, and she is nothing because the man takes all. He is the winner. So you've got the Islamic Tribunal of Dallas that is now having 300 cases a year. Started in 2014, that's ramped up. And I looked at some of the other ones. One of the big ones in the US is the North American Islamic Trust. And back in 2003, I think it was in a Senate hearing, and it talked about them then having title deeds to 300 to 325 US mosques. Now, at the time, that was 11%. At the time, there were about 1,300 mosques, so 10%. You now have 2,700 mosques, according to 2020 figures. That is well above 3,000 now. So who knows how many mosques the North American Islamic Trust now operates. It could be far more. At that time, it was 27%. It could, if it's the same amount, then they run 650 mosques in the US. And again, there are Sharia courts attached to a number of those mosques, and this is about divorces, this is about estate issues, local issues. And again, these are run by all male, as you can imagine, 4 men. A lot of these are trained in the Middle East. So they come over, they then run these courts and subject these women to medieval rules. And when I look back at the state of Texas, I kind of thought as a foreigner, Texas has always been a red state. And then you look, it was you only had 3 Republican governors, I think, since the founding of Texas State up until George W. Bush. And then you've had 30 years since George W. Bush, Rick Perry, and Greg Abbott. This ramping up of mosques, this ramping up of Sharia courts, this ramping up of halal food in Dallas in Houston running at 23% a year, the biggest growth in halal food in America in Houston. This has happened under Republican governors. Now, it's not my place to criticize. I will let the Warren posse have their say on that. But there is a concern that this is happening under the noses, and at least Greg Abbott has woken up to this.
McElveen, I've been told forever in London and in Texas that the Sharia courts have no no standing, no bearing. They can't do anything. What do you mean they're telling women what to do and they're making these codes? They tell us over and over again. Not the Muslims. They say, no, Sharia law, it works. I'm talking about American officials sit there constantly and say, you're wrong. You're an alarmist. In England, you're an alarmist. They have no standing, no jurisdiction. What say you, sir?
Well, I've made this point regularly, Steve, and my point would be tell this to the women that may live in 2025 in Dallas, but really they're subjected to a legal system that is 7th century Arabia. They don't know any better because many of them don't speak English. It's a closed community. They are not allowed out of their house. They're not allowed out to work. They are simply there to look after the children. Now, in the US, in the UK, it was the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal Act. Say that quickly. And that was passed 1982, I believe. And then since then, we've allowed Muslim courts, of which there are 85. In America, it's slightly different. My understanding is that you've got the Federal Arbitration Act of 1924 or 1925. And that allows Christian, Jewish, and Muslim courts. Now, I would argue, why do you need religious courts in a country? Because then you've got competing different laws. That is where the opening happened to allow this. So for 100 years, this has been happening, but you haven't had mass immigration. You haven't had Muslim entities. Now you do. Now you have this huge growth, and therefore this is a problem. So they're using that legislation now. Of course, that legislation says these bodies function as private arbitration tribunals. They're not official courts, but it does seem to say that it gives force of law to the judgments. Therefore, they do seem to be legally binding. Now, it says they're only legally binding if it doesn't conflict with federal or state laws. But you tell me, which court or police officer is going to go into an Islamic area and demand access to those rulings and then to begin to enforce or unenforce them? That doesn't happen. Of course, these courts, it's wonderful because it's not in English. There are no records kept. There's no transparency. So the government is not allowed a look in. If it was allowed a look in, it would realize that these are absolutely unfair to how women are treated, especially in divorce cases, in custody cases, in financial cases, in business transactions. This is unfair and does conflict with U.S. law. But you'll need a very brave individual in law enforcement or courts that's going to enforce the rule of law.
We're going to have to do that in Texas. One of the reasons I'm meeting with Glenn Story and the team this afternoon is that you're going to have you've designated the Muslim Brotherhood in the care as terrorist organization. Now you got to get down to it. You got to dig them out of here, and starting with these Sharia courts. And I'm telling you, what's happening in Texas, very, very scary. We're going to have a bunch of big announcements about all this in the days and weeks ahead before Christmas about January and 26, what we're going to do. To start off with a bang, McElvenna, where do they go to get to see the show, which is on fire, and also your social media?
Well, every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern, we had Alec Lace on looking at fatherhood on Monday. We've got Bridget Gabriel on Thursday, tomorrow, talking about this very issue, the Muslim Brotherhood care, this debate about Islam that suddenly opened up. And of course, you can watch on War Room. You can watch on Rumble, Getter on War Room, or you can jump over to X on Hearts of Oak at Hearts of Oak UK. But stick with War Room and you'll find us every Monday, Thursday, Saturday.
And also my personal up on Getter. Peter, thank you, and great work. We appreciate what you're doing for our country and for England, Great Britain.